Joan, thank you for being available for our conversation today. I'd like to ask
It's
you,
my pleasure.
first off, do you have a definition of resilience that you find usable and workable for you?
Yeah, look, I've put some thought into that. I think for me, it's almost the flip side of distress. So if distress is the perception that one's resources do not meet demands, then I might say that resilience is the flip side of that, that resilience is the perception that available resources exceed demands. In other words, you can respond from choice, that you have options, you've got resources, you can meet the demands and see them as a challenge rather than as a threat.
So, perception is a big component of resilience?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that while I can't quote the recent research, I have been noticing increasingly in articles that are coming through, whether they're from neuroscience or positive psychology, that our perception makes a huge difference. And so the emotional intelligence field, for example, is increasingly involved in training people to improve their ability to name emotions and make them available to reasoning, to be able to respond from more choice.
So, rather than having a measure of an individual's resilient quotient or component, the
Mm.
key for you is how we as individuals perceive our options and how we perceive whether whether we can cope with the change or the challenge or whatever it is. That's a kind of a key active point for you.
I would say it is a key. It wouldn't be the only one.
Right.
So another piece that I came across just recently, which I find interesting, that only came to me recently because it's from 1963, is a guy, an adult educator at the University of Michigan, published on the topic of margin of power, is what he called it. His name was Howard McCluskey, I believe. And he said that, your margin of power, your resources, if you will, was equivalent to what he said was load over power. So load being the external factors that you have to respond to. So these would be challenges, the various roles that you play, the external expectations on you. And load could also be internal. So your internal expectations of yourself, your goals, your skills and aptitudes, what you have, what I shouldn't have said skills and aptitudes, but load is, the demands placed on you.
Right.
And power is what you have to bring to meet that demand. And so power comes from your perceptions. As I said earlier, perception is part of it, but also your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health at the time, your access to what is meaningful to you. So whether you perceive that something is meaningful to you, and your ability to hold that as an anchor.
Right.
So yeah, so I actually think of it as quite a complex subject, and you could apply it to individuals, organizations, teams.
So just thinking about an individual at the moment, when we feel overwhelmed with either things that are going on around us or things that are going on inside us, is that our resilience being compromised, or is it our perception being compromised, or both?
It could be both.
Right.
I think that we've seen, another thing that's being written about currently is the fact that if we see resilience as the ability to bounce back to a challenge, okay, to be able to return to our normal way of functioning. there's something about, okay, that's all right with the one-off challenge, but can you sustain it?
Right.
Yeah, and so, we're seeing articles in the literature currently about organizations that have placed increasing demands on their managers as a result of the financial crisis.
Yeah.
So whereas prior to 2009, maybe they were managing 7 people, which is, the expectation that a single manager should be able to manage just 7 people effectively. Now the expectation is they manage 12 to 14. Mm-hmm. And actually that's not sustainable.
No.
So while we can, use, we can build a resilience and rely on it to respond to increasing challenges. And part of that is our ability to perceive the challenge, to perceive the situation as a challenge rather than a threat.
Right.
There's also a very real aspect to it that you can be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It is possible to draw down resilience.
Is it inevitable that every system will break down?
No, it's not inevitable. I mean, if you think of an organization like a garden, if you understand your context and you understand what the needs are to keep your garden functioning, you have to do all the things. You have to weed out those people who are no longer effective or don't have the skills for the context. The context is changing all the time, so you have to stay on top of it. You have to fertilize it, you have to weed it, you have to prune it. Yeah. Make sure that you've got the right plants in the right place, the right people.
But if a hurricane comes through, it can just sweep all that away, can't it?
Yeah, that's right. So then it's a matter of building it back up.
Right. So I was thinking in terms of your discussion about the increasing pressures on certain types of organisation, there might come a point where no matter how hard the individuals within the organisation are trying to keep it resilient and strong, that external forces could just break it apart anyway.
That's right.
Yeah. So how do we discern the difference between the need to garden more effectively and to run for the hills to avoid the tsunami coming up the beach?
Wow. There's some mixed metaphors there.
Of course there are.
Let me try to unpack that. I really think of this as a holographic exercise, really. Mm-hmm. So it does start with individuals. And, as individuals, we exist in teams, in families, in organizations. And it has to come back to individuals to be able to manage their own energy and their own resilience. So, and then a collective of individuals do that as a team and as an organization. So there's an underlying understanding that needs to be in place of what are my needs? Like a real honest understanding, self-awareness. What are my needs? And with humility and understanding, respect for one another's humanity as well. Like we do have individual needs. We need to get them met. We need to protect our context, our space, so that we can get those needs met. If we're going to be functioning and be at choice, be able to respond to the complex context that we're in. So if an individual is going to do that, there's all different ways that you can build your self-awareness. Once you have an understanding of what your needs are, then find ways to get those met. And in the case of, I think Thomas Leonard, who was one of the fathers of the modern professional coaching practice, he talked about setting boundaries, and setting boundaries that protect you and setting them far enough out, not just what you think you need, but even more, and then enforcing those boundaries. So what is not allowed to enter your space? Okay, and so that an example of that might be, I don't allow people to raise their voice to me, or I don't allow people to book all of the time in my diary, because I'm going to save some time to do my actual work.
Right.
So those are really concrete examples. You might also look as well as at what your expectations are of yourself, and making sure they're not too high.
Yeah.
So you might have to lower your expectations or adjust them. But the third and I think really important thing is to make an honest assessment of what reserves you need to have in place.
Right.
And reserves being physical, mental, emotional, building up extra amounts of support, friends, money, physical health and energy, so that you as an individual, when you take yourself into a team, you can be more available and more at choice, and help the team be the same, and that team can help the organization be the same.
Yeah. So do you think that, those categories that you just described, are they universal across all cultures, all places, in terms of the individual ways in which we can build or enhance and protect our resilience?
It's a really good question, John. I've been playing with that question, as you may know, for a long time, and I have been doing leadership development in various cultures, mainly in Asia-Pacific region. I typically will challenge my my participants to reflect on that. I believe the answer is yes.
Right.
I believe that if you use a coach approach to engage in this question, most people have can develop an understanding of their context and understand it far better than any coach would. So if you're asking the right questions and you ask them, what are your needs? What do you feel you need to thrive? What does that look like? And you help them, or they have their own self-awareness around that, and they understand the context far better than you do. And then you can ask, well, what would be a way that you could put some protections in place, so boundaries. Yeah.
I was thinking about, cultures where the most important thing in an individual person's life is actually the well-being of, say, the family unit or another social group. And so if I came out of that context, I might, if you ask me that question, what is most important to me, it might not relate to me so much as my duty or obligation to ensure that my family is well cared for and is looked after and has a good, strong future. So that the answer to the question might be more social or community oriented rather than about I. It might be more about a we type of answer. Would that still fit with the framework that you're thinking about?
Absolutely, because in collective cultures, the social aspect is very protective.
Right.
So when you are looking after your family, you're looking after your community, and you're doing that bit, you are enhancing your integrity and your credibility in the community. And it is a very protective factor. You can expect to receive the same kind of support in return. Yeah. Okay. And so for that, that's not so much the case in our cultures, no. But although it can be.
Oh yes, yes. Yes. I think we all know how there are expectations that we respond to the needs of our families at the same time as we're encouraged to be individuals and have our own hopes and plans and dreams for the future. And sometimes those things can feel like they're at conflict with each other.
Actually, this is another thing that's coming up. I just saw a report recently. I think I published it on LinkedIn, um, uh, where in the States they're noticing that young women are opting out of high stress roles at a greater rate than men.
Really?
And I suspect that it's a combination of external role expectations. So all the various things that are expected of them as carers, as friends, as mothers, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
along with increasing internal expectations of what they expect to get out of their careers.
Oh.
And at some point, they realize this is not sustainable, and they make a choice.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so they're making a choice because that's getting back to where we started in the sense the
Mm.
choices about that we make about our resilience and the loads that we bear and the choices that we make to make sure we protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just before we finish, can I ask you one question about the role of leadership? Because well, I guess there's two aspects to leadership. There's the pressure that leaders themselves have to maintain for themselves, because it's a really high just a high stress role being a leader. But then there's also the ways in which leaders can help protect and encourage the resilience of their teams. So,
Yeah.
what can you tell us about leadership and resilience?
It's all about managing expectations.
What, your own expectations as a leader, or the team's expectations, or both?
All.
All.
So, all. It's holographic.
Right.
Okay. So, individual leaders need to keep track of what they're expecting of themselves. Yeah. And, we hear it often, the oxygen mask on first, right?
Right.
The more self-aware a leader is, the more emotionally intelligent,
Okay.
the better able they are to assess where that line is. How far can they push themselves? How far should they? The best leaders I've seen have been able to be very self-aware and understand when they need to take a break,
Yep.
when they need to give their teams a break, when they need to be pushing back on expectations from the context.
Right.
So, there's different ways to manage that. I mean, a lot of leaders say to me, "Well, I can't. There's nothing I can do."
Right.
Well, that to me tells me they have low resilience already.
Right.
If there's nothing I can do, then they're not at choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So being at choice is the point that we're looking for, in a sense of if I need to do something rather to help myself, I first of all need to be at that point where I can recognize there are choices, that I can identify some choices. I need to be able to be at choice, to be able to say there is something I can do and start exploring some of those options. Is that kind of where I'm going?
Well, yeah, and then a lot of people may not be there. They may
Right.
not feel their choice. So then the first thing is to be aware.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm feeling like I have to do this. I'm giving up my own personal goals. I'm not meeting my targets or whatever it is.
Right.
And so then being able to step back and reassess what are my options.
Right.
And
And
I may need help to do that.
I was just going to say that it sounds like that's a fairly difficult thing to do inside my own head, and those are the times where I need a really good friend or a colleague to be able to help me make that step back and try and kind of paint that landscape that I feel like I'm in.
Yeah.
Doing that alone is quite a big task, isn't it? It's almost impossible.
We can build our skill in that area over time.
Right.
The more experience you get with this kind of problem solving, the awareness that you've backed yourself into a corner. Okay, I recognize where I am now, and I know how to get out of it.
Right.
We can build that skill.
And once you've learned how to do that in one context, then you're going to be able to remember how you did it in that previous context and maybe begin to apply some of those skills in a next context.
That's right. And
so,
that's how I approach leadership development.
Right. So it's kind of like a stepwise building of a success here, applying that to a different context, and moving on with that. Is that so? What's the ultimate? This is a question to finish on. Is the ultimate outcome of doing this wisdom? Would you describe? I mean, it sounds like the kind of things that wise people do. They see their context, they understand their limits, they know what their choices are, they take action, and we look at them and we say, "Boy, that person's really wise." Is that a fair thing, or is that an unfair way of describing it?
I think that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think very very few people who reach that point would declare that they are now wise. I think they would be far more humble about it because they recognize that this is a process.
Yeah,
it's not a destination.
I'm thinking that the people that I know who are designated as wise are people who have had that designation given to them rather than have claimed it for themselves, and maybe that's
right.
part of the process is that you're going to be seen by others as being wise because of the way in which you manage these choices that you've got.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Stephen Covey called it character building.
Right.
In the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, when he talked about proactive choice and moving from stimulus to response through choice.
Yeah.
He said the more you do that, the more intentionally you do that, the more you build your character.
And we've tended to use that phrase, character building, in colloquial life as being kind of a throwaway phrase. Someone trips over and gets themselves up and they say, "Oh, that was character building." But really what Covey was talking about is something much deeper and more to do with our identity and the way in which we perceive the world, isn't it? It's something that's almost with capital C and a capital B rather than just that little character building type thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. So it's something we need to, if we're going to be really successful at this, it's something we need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Intentionally pay attention.
Well, and invariably we don't, right? So we think we're very powerful, and we can do just that little bit more,
Yeah.
And so we do back ourselves into corners, and we do feel overwhelmed at times. And I guess that's the resilience factor. How quickly can you return to resilience once you've lost it is another question.
So it's kind of like those things that you've described, backing ourselves into a corner, overreaching ourselves, could kind of be like warning signs, like little things in the back of our head that say, if I'm feeling like this, then maybe I need to stop a minute and just take a look around at the context and the scenery and myself and say, something's going on here that I really need to now pay attention to.
Yeah, being reactive. Responding in a way that you wouldn't if you had more resources.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We've run out of time, but is there anything else that you want to say, Joan, to us as we close up? You don't have to. Feel free. If there's any last piece of advice that you'd like us to have.
Advice. I think this is a fantastic series, and I feel privileged to be part of it. Thank you for inviting me. And I just wish everyone, the awareness that resilience is something, it's a process, and we build it over time through our choices.
Thank you, Joan, for your time today and for your passion and enthusiasm. And if anyone watching this wants to contact Joan about her work, her contact details are on the screen right now, or they can be found on her LinkedIn page, which you'll be able to find through doing Google searches for her as well. Thanks, Joan, and look forward to seeing you again.
That's terrific. Thank you.